Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and today we're going to be talking about the Manticore, the energy frame of Lancer. This is a very interesting frame because its biggest aspects is one, its use of energy and energy damage, and two, this porcupine looking frame over here. Yeah, it's a frame that also is very much punishes enemies for being around or near it. It's a striker frame, and honestly, it's a pretty fun frame, but let's go ahead and take a look at the stats and the rest of the license to see why that is so. All right, so we're taking a look at the stats here. We can see that this is actually a tankier frame than normal, having 2 armor, which is a little rare, and having 8 HP, which while that is average, it's not sacrificing any of its HP for the extra armor, though it does have an abysmal evasion. In fact, this mech is always going to be hit unless the enemy rolls truly terrible. So that's something you really have to take into consideration. And while this is not necessarily uncommon for tankier frames, the Manticore itself is not a defender frame. It's not designed to have a lot of abilities to negate damage. Well, unless we're talking about energy damage. So, that being the case, it's something you really have to be aware of. And E defense is actually a bit higher than average at 10, which does make sense with its energy kind of motif. It is disrupting signals and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty good. Now, its heat capacity is higher than average, which is pretty cool. It lets us do a lot more heated actions, overcharging, all that other kind of stuff. Sensor range is average. It has a bonus attack tech, though, which is pretty good. Its repair capacity is a little low, though, and with its already low evasion, that's something you're going to have to very much keep in mind, as this particular frame, you're probably going to want to invest in hull to get more repair capacity and have higher HP. The save target is average, and its speed is on the slow end with below average system points. So this is kind of a bulky frame. Now, it's a size 1, despite what the stats might here indicate, and it is something that I feel a lot of people are probably going to struggle with right out the gate until you get its play style down. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the frame traits. So Slag Carapace gives it resistance to energy damage and burn, which is actually very unique. Not many things have resistance to burn. A lot of things have more resistance to like other types of damage. So that's also really, really cool. Now, it's not heat, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, unstable systems. When destroyed, the Manticore explodes as per reactor meltdown at the end of its next turn. I don't know why this trait is here. Most of the time, when you get like stress damage on your frame or structure damage on your frame, rather, your mech is very likely to just explode. Like, it becomes more likely the more structure you're taking. So that being the case, this seems like such a I mean, your mech always explodes, I guess. But also, as a trait, that's just a bad trait because this means that you only get use of this when your mech explodes, which seems very strange to have as a trait. I mean, I guess it's fine because it doesn't seem like it takes any, like, it has pretty good overall stats for the frame. So this seems like just an extra thing. But I don't know. It's one of the traits that I'm not super happy with. And castigate the enemies of the Godhead. I do love this frame's kind of motifing because it also has kind of a zealous, like, religious aspect to it, which is kind of cool. So when you rest or perform a full repair, you can push the Manticore into an unstable castigation state. In this state, the Manticore explodes immediately when destroyed due to damage or reactor meltdown, vaporizing it and instantly killing you and any other passengers. Characters within Burst 2 must succeed on an agility save or take 8d6 explosive damage. On a success, they take half damage. This only takes place if you are physically present in the Manticore. I don't like this trait either. This is such a dumb trait. So there's no additional benefits other than the fact that when you get damage out, you just instantly explode. Like, that's something that is interesting from a respect of like any enemies that take you down are going to get taken down with you. But even then, 8d6 explosive damage, that's not a lot. And it's a burst 2 only. And it costs your life because this only works if your pilot is inside the mech. So I don't know. Like on a use basis, 2 of the 3 frame traits here only are useful when your mech gets destroyed. And the third one, or the second one here, only does something if it can kill you. I don't know. That sounds terrible. Side Carapace is really cool. The other 2 traits are kind of garbage, in my opinion. Let's go ahead and take a look at the frame traits here, or the mounts here. So we have a flex mount and a heavy mount. Only 2 mounts on this frame kind of sucks, not gonna lie. Now it has a heavy mount, which is pretty cool. I just wish that it had a main aux rather than just a flex mount, because now you have to choose between a main weapon or 2 aux weapons. So, I mean, it's not the worst, and it's by far not the only frame that has this particular configuration, but it's one of the types of configurations that I'm not a particular fan of. It just doesn't seem like it adds too much. And this is a striker frame, so you want the ability to at least do something, have some heavy firepower. And with the heavy mount, you can't use this super heavy unless you only want a singular super heavy mount, which, again, is something that I don't know. In any regard, this is not a great start. Its stats were very stellar, but the traits and the weapon mounts are kind of they don't make me very excited for the rest of the frame here. But let's go ahead and look at its core systems, because its core systems are actually pretty good. I'll hide my camera here real quick. So, it has a passive ability. Once per round, when you take heat, you may deal 2 armor-piercing energy damage to a character within range 3. Range 3 is pretty massive, and 2 armor-piercing energy damage is pretty good. In fact, only another Manticore can really not take the 2 damage from this particular effect. So that being the case, as a passive, that's actually insanely good. And I don't know if this is the reason why its traits kind of suck or its mounts kind of aren't that great. But regardless, I do really, really like this one. Now, the active is really cool, and it has an insane name. Destruction of the Temple of the Enemies of Ra. So your mech crackles with energy, and you gain resistance to heat, which is very, very hype, for the rest of the scene, and you gain a charge die. It's a D6, and it starts on a 1. Whenever you take heat or energy damage, even from yourself, increase the value of the charge die by 1. When the charge die reaches 6, the absorbed energy discharges in a burst to Inferno. Characters within the area must make an engineering save or take 6d6 armor-piercing energy damage. On success, they take half damage. Objects in the area are automatically hit, and once this discharge, this effect ends. So, this is something that I'm a little confused about. So, the last sentence here, once discharged, this effect ends. So, are you no longer benefiting from the active after the discharge? Or are you no longer using the charge die? Because it says you gain resistance to heat for the rest of the scene and a charge die. So the charge die doesn't seem to last for the rest of the scene. The resistance to heat is pretty good. And honestly, there's a lot of ways that this particular core power has some massive benefits. Resistance to heat damage when when you already have a pretty high heat cap is pretty good. It's insanely good, actually. I just don't like the effect that the active ability, the explosive damage, only works once you activate the power. That's something that seems very silly to me in general. But the passive definitely makes up for a lot of the weakness of the frame in general. In fact, that 2 armor piercing energy damage, even if it's once per round, is pretty good, honestly. And it's really easy to take heat. So easy, in fact, that this is guaranteed to pretty much go off every round. So I'm left at a somewhat of a crossroads when it comes. I love the attributes of this frame. I think it's really good. I think there's a lot of things you can do with it. I like Slide Carapace, and I love the passive to the core system. I don't like pretty much everything else. I guess the active isn't so bad because it gives you resistance to heat too. I just don't like how the charge just ends once. I don't like half these frame traits. The weapon mounts are kind of not super great. So I'm very mixed on this frame, but let's go ahead and take a look at the other parts of the license to see if maybe I can change my opinion here. All right, so in the first rank, we start off with a weapon, which you know I love having weapons in the beginning of a license. This is the Catalyst Pistol. This is actually an insane pistol. So it's a Cone 3, Threat 3, 1d3 energy damage. Now, that's pretty good. Energy damage is a little bit rare as far as weapons are concerned. There's also a close quarters combat weapon, so any talents that relate to that, like combined arms or Vanguard, works really well with this particular weapon. But the Cone 3 is pretty good, and it's Threat 3. So this is a really, really good Overwatch weapon. Now, it does have a downside of doing 2 heat to yourself. Now, this particular mech, that's actually really good because whenever you fire this mech, even if it's on Overwatch, you'll also do 3 armor-piercing energy damage to the enemy. And because it's a Threat 3, the enemy is going to be within range for your core passive. So that being the case, this is pretty good, even if you're just using it like as purely a Overwatch weapon on standby. So honestly, this is a pretty good weapon. The Cone 3 is also pretty rare as far as some weapons are concerned. So yeah, it doesn't do a ton of damage, but because it does area damage, it has the potential of doing a lot more. The biggest benefit is this is mostly good on the Manticore because the heat cost is pretty high. 2 heat, I would make this a 1 heat, honestly, balancing wise. But 2 heat is what's going to help trigger our Manticore effect. And when you use your core ability, then you get 1 heat instead because you gain resistance. So that being the case, the Catalyst Pistol is a pretty cool pistol overall and really good on the Manticore specifically. We have another system here at rank 1, which is the Beckoner, and this one is a tech-related one, which is actually very interesting. Now, the Manticore does offer a bonus to tech attack, so it does make sense that this is here. It's just a very interesting mix-up for a striker frame. So this is Beckoner. It has 2 invades that you can do. Beckon, the first one, you take 1d6 plus 2 armor-piercing energy damage. So you take this damage, but you swap places with the target of your invade, and both characters teleport to the other's positions. Your target must be a mech and be the same size as you or larger. So this is very interesting. So it says they must be the same size as you or larger. So you actually can't use this against size 1/2 mechs, which I guess this prevents you from teleporting to a location where you can't be. But I don't know. It's very, very interesting. Now, characters can only be swapped to spaces they could normally stand or move. So you cannot swap with a midair target unless you're also flying. This is potentially good or bad. It's something that I I would have preferred that, yeah, sure, maybe I teleport up and drop and take some damage, but I can ground a flying enemy. Can't do that unless you can already fly. So if you are taking the Manticore or actually any other frame that has flights, this is actually a potentially an interesting one. The only bad part is the 1d6 plus 2 armor piercing energy damage. Now for the Manticore, that's not necessarily as big of an issue because you are cutting that in half, but it is still a ton of damage just for a swap. So I don't know how useful this is. The second invade here is actually the one that you'd probably use more often than not, which is all characters within range 3 of your target are pulled adjacent to them or as close as possible. Now, this is all characters, not just enemies. So, that might be a good thing, it might be a bad thing, depending. And it's something that is, I think, very useful if you have allies who are kind of close, because 3 range is not really far. But if an enemy is attempting to like get away, for instance, is running away from your other slower mech friends, this might be a way to help them close the gap. This is also just a really good way to clump a bunch of energy or enemies together for area damage for your team. So that being the case, summon is actually really, really good. Both of these are kind of okay. Beckon is one of those strange ones where I don't know when this one will be useful. I do think there are some really good uses. This is actually Beckon's actually really good on a tank frame because if you're going in and you want to be in the middle of the enemies, this is a really good one. Blackbeard probably can also make good use of Beckon as well, even though Blackbeard is really terrible at invading. But still, it's you know, I don't know. It's definitely an interesting one, and I guess it matches the Manticore's almost like masochistic play style, where you want to put yourself in harm's way as much as possible, so you can blow up. I don't know. It's I don't know. I like Beckoner though. I think for a 2 point system, this is actually pretty good. All right, here at rank 2, we have the arc projector. This is a heavy quarters combat weapon. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, really good with the Vanguard specifically. Has a range of 5 and it does a d6 plus 1 energy damage. That's not actually that bad for energy damage or for damage, and because it's energy specifically, that kind of gives it a little extra buff. You can also see here that using the weapon does do 1 heat damage to yourself. So something to keep in mind. But again, for the Manticore, that's something obviously you're going to want to do. Though this does have a range of 5. So if you're using it at range 5, the Manticore is not going to get as big of a benefit. So it says it also has an additional effect here, and this is actually an insane weapon. I really, really like it. The arc projector is a chain lightning gun. So you can make a secondary attack against a different character within range 3 of the first target. You can continue making secondary attacks on hits as long as there are new valid targets within range. However, each generates 1 heat, and the secondary attacks can't deal bonus damage. Characters can't be hit more than once by the same firing of this weapon. So this actually is a really cool weapon. It is a chain lightning gun that you can use, though each bounce will cost you 1 heat. And unfortunately, even if you use your core power as the Manticore, when you cut damage in half, you always round up. So you always will be taking a minimum of 1 damage. Now, this weapon is actually insanely good on the Genghis. This is a different weapon. If you don't want to go fire and you want to go with either the Genghis or the world killer Genghis, blah, as a lightning variant, this weapon is actually really, really cool. With all your ability, like with all the ways you can heat or vent heat, it's actually really fun. And if the Manticore wants to go into Genghis to pick up some of those heat venting systems, it's actually not a bad way to go. I really, really love the arc projector, and honestly, going 2 ranks into Manticore just for this weapon is actually pretty huge. I would actually do that myself because there's just so many uses for this particular weapon. It's a very, very fun weapon. I really, really love it. All right. Also here at rank 2, along with the Manticore, we have Smites. Now, this is a more expensive 3-point system, and it is more invades. Manticore has a surprising number of invades, given that it doesn't have anything besides just a bonus to tech attack. Regardless, Smite is pretty cool. So you take a d6 armor piercing energy damage. Again, not such a big deal for the Manticore itself. And your target must succeed a system save or become stunned until the end of their next turn. Each character can only be stunned by this effect once per scene. So that itself, Smite, is pretty strong, and depending on, if you're using a Manticore, this can also proc your passive, which does 2 armor piercing energy damage to the enemy. And because it's an invade, there's also probably a chance that you're doing 2 heat to them as well. So that being the case, Smite's actually pretty fun. Now, you can only use this once per enemy, but stunning an enemy for only a d6 like energy damage on a frame that takes half energy damage anyway is a pretty big get, honestly. It's something that I think works really, really well in the Manticore's favor. Seer is also another very interesting one. You take a d6 armor piercing energy damage, so again, not so bad for our Manticore, and you deal 2 heat to your target for each other character of size 1 or larger that is engaged with them, including yourself, up to a maximum of 6 heat. Now, invading also just does heat to the enemy. So this is going to give a massive ton of heat, and it's a good way to stress out another frame. This one also works really well with the Beckoner because the Beckoner can group a bunch of enemies up on a single target, so you can do that. And then you can use another tech action, or you can overcharge to then sear the target, doing a massive amount of damage to that target. And I don't think summon actually does damage to your frame. So that's actually not a bad combination. Now, again, this is much better for the Manticore because you're taking armor piercing energy damage. But I can see using Sear on other frames as well. Granted, again, these are masochistic abilities. Like, the whole point is you're taking damage to do this kind of stuff. Some frames can take that, other frames can't. Sear's a really good ability if you're playing a heat build where you're trying to get as much heat on the enemy as possible to stress them out. So, it's a really, really cool one, but it is a double-edged sword. All right, so we are on to the final rank of the Manticore, but before we get into those final 2 systems here, just as a reminder, as always, if you're enjoying this content and you want other people to see it, go ahead and leave a like. It really helps out the channel and it makes it so other people have a higher chance of finding this content. In addition, if you want to see more content like this, subscribe so that you will be notified, hopefully, when another video comes out, or at least you're more likely to see it. And of course, you can always hit that bell or join our official Discord linked in the description. In the Discord, you'll always get a message no matter what whenever a new video comes out. So join our community or support us here on the channel. Either way, I hope you're enjoying the content. But let's go ahead and get on to the final 2 systems here on the rank 3 of the Manticore license. All right, EMP Pulse is not one I particularly like. So it's 2 system points here, and you become stunned until the end of your next turn, and all characters within Burst 1 without the biological tag must make a system save or also become stunned until the end of their next turn. Characters other than yourself can only be stunned once per scene by this effect. Now, why I don't like this particular system is Smite does kind of the same thing. Only, one, it benefits the Manticore because you damage yourself, which can proc your passive. And 2, you also don't become stunned. And in addition, this one you have to use pretty much as your last action of the round because you become stunned as soon as you use this. So your turn just ends and you need to wait until the end of your next turn before you can do anything, making you incredibly vulnerable. I don't see a good reason to stun yourself for literally a whole round to do this. Now, it is a burst 1, sure, but I mean, if you can summon on yourself, because that's kind of like the strat, right? You use summon on yourself, you bring a bunch of enemies to you, then you use the EMP pulse to stun all of those enemies. Cool, I guess. You take yourself out of the combat for, who knows how long, and the enemies are vulnerable to your allies, but there's just other ways to make enemies, like I said, Smite just seems like a better way, and having multiple enemies stunned is not necessarily a great thing unless the targets are exceptionally dangerous to your team, and keeping them down for any length of time just helps because your team only gets so much firepower to deal with enemies, and it's not likely that your teammates are going to be able to take down, more than 2 enemies at a time when doing this. I don't see a reason to take out one of your whole turns just to stun when we have something like Smite that just does it better, procs your passive, and just works overall better. There's probably uses for this one, I'm sure, and I'm sure there's people who found really good ways to use EM Pulse. I just, like, if it was maybe a burst 2 or something, I could see it better because it would be easier to position with it. It just seems like in order to use this one effectively, you need to use the Beckoner with Summon to get this, and I mean, then it becomes like, what, 4 system points just for one strat? So, I don't know. This is not one of my favorite ones, and I would definitely not go to 3 ranks. to get this one. But let's go ahead and see the other system here and see if that makes it better. All right, so now we're on to the final system of the Manticore license here, the final rank 3, and this one is an expensive one, the lightning generator, which is 3 system points, but it's actually pretty cool. So this is a protocol that you activate, and when you activate it, you take a heat and deal 2 energy damage to all characters and objects adjacent to you. If you're in the danger zone at the start of your turn, so if your heat is half or higher, this protocol activates automatically, but the damage increases to 4 armor piercing energy damage. So this is a really good one for any frames that are particularly like to be in the danger zone, even though you are guaranteed to take a heat every turn. You can activate this for free, as like protocols are already kind of free, but technically it says this protocol activates automatically. So you could technically use 2 protocols if I'm understanding this correctly. And dealing 1 heat to the Manticore itself is really good, because not only are you doing, even at base, not only are you doing 2 energy damage to all characters around you, but you're also going to do an additional 2 armor piercing energy damage to one of those targets, which is pretty cool. Now, this only works on targets that are adjacent to you. Again, it kind of makes the Manticore a very conflicting frame, because the frame itself seems to want to be in melee combat, but it's so easy to hit, and it doesn't have really many defensive systems against standard arms, that it just seems like you want to kill yourself. This is like a suicide frame, which is an interesting idea, but I just don't see the big appeal to it, if you know what I mean. Now, if you're in the danger zone, that 4 armor piercing energy damage is nuts. That's a massive amount of damage to deal to targets around you. Really good if you're a grappling frame. Honestly, Lightning Generator is expensive and is dealing heat to yourself, but is still really cool. I like Lightning Generator, and if you're already 2 points into Manticore and you're blending it with Defender Frame, because honestly, a lot of the Manticore abilities can work really well with Defender Frames, I would probably also just dip into the 3rd rank to pick up Lightning Generator. It does suck that EMP Pulse is not good, in my opinion. It's not worth the system points, but Lightning Generator itself is really good. And that's it for Manticore. A very interesting frame. I think overall it's a good frame. I don't like its traits. I think its weapon mounts are a little lacking, but its weapons are really cool. The arc projector being one of my favorite weapons in the game. Beckoner is very interesting. Smite is insanely powerful, and Lightning Generator comes up with a lot of builds. I really like the Manticore, because even if you're not using the Manticore frame, you can have an energy aesthetic with another type of frame that you're using. Like I said, I think it's a really cool idea to have the lightning variant of a Genghis mixed with a Manticore. So I think there's a lot of really cool things here. It's a good license. It's definitely a interesting frame, and I think that there's some aspects to it that make it difficult for people to really get in their head the mentality, because in all honesty, the frame looks like it's just trying to kill you. That's the thing. It's trying to kill the pilot in it, because it's such a masochistic frame. I don't know. It's very, very weird. But it's got some really, really cool things, and I thoroughly enjoy the Manticore. This week, we're actually going to be hitting another frame, so look out Thursday, and we're going to be hitting my favorite frame in the game, Big Sal the Saladin. I really love the Saladin. It's my favorite frame in the game, so I'm very excited about this one. We're going to be checking out this Thursday, so stay tuned. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.